Delighted on this episode to be talking once more with author and creator Dr. Braxton Cosby. Braxton, thank you for joining.
Hey, how you doing? Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
It is a pleasure. It is a pleasure to talk with you again. And I remember the last time you had quite the range of creating that you were working in. I think you took me on like a tour of a room and an entire universe that you were building. So how is the universe coming along?
It's coming along great. What I decided to do, because obviously, I'm the CEO of Cosby Media Production, which is a small press publisher down here in Atlanta, Georgia. We have our own comic imprint. So as a small press publisher, we publish over 30 authors with different titles and like over 60 titles in ebooks, audiobooks, and paperback. We do poetry, self-help, inspirational, fantasy fiction, science fiction, young adult fiction, and we've even got some biographies in there. So we also have our own comic imprint that has printed over 18 comics and mixed with graphic novels and comics. And they're basically branching stories from the stories we're already telling in our novels. So we've got some manga stuff, we've got some superhero stuff, and we've got some science fiction all kind of rolled into one with some dystopian. My latest project is the Yasuke duology, which basically follows the historical figure of Yasuke, who was the first recorded and only recorded, from what I understand, African samurai, and basically his journey from being a slave in the Sudan and then his rise to being a dubbed as a samurai under the services of Lord Nobunaga. So I have this big Mount Rushmore of Braxton titles myself, other than being the CEO, which I like. On the right hand, you'll have like the Yasuke series, which is the latest one. You'll have the Cape series, which is my superhero saga. You have the Red Gemini Chronicles, which is my science fiction series with winners of Star-Crossed Saga and also the Steel Rain series. And then the other one you have is the Broken series, which is the novel from Keith Donovan and the Broken series, along with the comic book and the graphic novel. So everybody in this banner is what we call hybrid publishing. We publish our stories in both novels and comics. So you may start that story off in a comic. It'll transition you into a novel, and you may even get a graphic novel thrown in there, or you may start in a novel and go comic and then graphic novel. So we like to offer our readers different a variation of reading through their experience with those stories. And so far, it's worked out very well. We've got a lot of great feedback that people like being challenged and kind of moved, even into some mediums that they may not be as comfortable and familiar with, but they're enjoying the stories that they read.
Yeah, yeah, that's a cool idea because I imagine with like a comic, you get the impression of the character, you get to see what someone has imagined them like, and then you get to move to prose where you're taking those images and creating them on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been an amazing journey for me because I started off as a novelist, but I kind of matriculated into script writing for screenplays and short stories and short films. And the challenge of kind of bringing my headspace from like 90,000, 100,000 words into scripts, which are basically a minute a page. So if you're writing a 2 hour script, you only got 120 pages to do it, and if you're doing something even shorter like a comedy, which is normally around 90 pages, that condensing feels even stronger. And when I finally moved into comic book writing, now things really got crunched. So you're down to like 24, 27 pages, graphic novel, maybe sometimes 60, 70 or more. So that challenge just kind of intensified, especially because I'm such a stickler for writing in 3 act structure and having uh, uh, a very structured outline that follows the hero's journey from beginning to end. Taking it into that, putting it into that smaller piece with a comic book that just has like maybe 5 to 7 panels a page, and then also going into scripts where you've got these scenes, throughout the story. And like they say in screenwriting, there's no throwaway scenes, there's no wasted scenes where you just make meaningless dialogue. You want everything to count. Same way when you write comic scripts or graphic novels, every panel on that page has a count, and there's no throwaways. So where you can be a little bit more lackluster with writing a novel, you can kind of just have fun with it, add some extra things in there to kind of build the characters of the world. You really got to be intentional with your script writing, whether it's a screenplay or a comic script. So It was really, really hard at first, but then the challenge, I kind of grew into it because of my love of story. And I kind of feast on it now. I'm like, I always want to have that novel and that comic experience because where I would have loved to see these things go on the big silver screen. Now I'm in a smaller compact screen, but I feel like working with the artists that we work with and the colorists and things like that, the comics have become kind of my film now. So where I don't have the big budget to produce some of these things in like, 20 million, $80 million films, I can now do it on a smaller budget in the comic. I can still, it's just another expansion of media with expression, where there's art and there's visuals that can take people on that journey, as well as making sure you wrap it around a fantastic story that they can enjoy.
Key in mind. How did you first come across this story? How did you discover this historical character?
Yeah, it was crazy, just kind of scrolling the internet. And I remember seeing this one image of him, this black man, and it was like a black and white photo in this samurai armor. And just for some context, I love Asian culture. Like me and my wife, we love food. I just love I am really more fascinated by European or Eastern kind of culture and things like that because of the architecture and like Greece and London and things. So I just love the expression. And of course, with Asian culture, there's just a lot of great things. So when I saw this black man in this samurai armor, I was like, man, this is kind of crazy. What is this about? Kind of blew it off. And then, just scrolling through the internet, a couple more days, now the algorithm's in. So they're
Hmm.
starting to send me stuff about him. And then I finally saw this name, Yasuke, and I'm like, what is this about, And so having wanted to always maybe write something, a story about Asia or even Africa, as I dove into the lore of Yasuke, it was kind of interesting because now I had a chance to write and take some history of Africa and now mix it with the Asian culture because that's exactly what Yasuki ended up being. And so I just dug in. I got as much information as I could on the history of this character, the world he lived in, the man he served under. And I said, you know what? This is going to be the great making of a fantastic historical fiction story because I can get all the building blocks from the history of him, whether it's the culture at the time of feudal Japan, it was the agriculture, it was the music, it was the religion, it was the geography of the area, it was the wars, it was the factions. All of that stuff was great. So it gave me a great opportunity as a writer to come up with a fictional prose that kind of connected everything. So I tell people all the time, the building blocks were the history, the cement, cinder blocks were history, and the mortar was the fictional story that I attached to it. Because as I research things, I just ask myself the natural question: well, how did he get here? How did he elevate? Who did he connect with? Why would Nobunaga consider him? And if he was a slave, how did he escape? So all those questions, I just came up with a narrative to answer it. And it really came quite naturally. People ask me all the time, like, well, how did you do this? How did I say, man, this was probably the easiest book I've written because you gave me so much to work with. I didn't have to really come up with it because the story kind of wrote itself. The beauty of it was just kind of putting together all of the human elements that I thought people would be attracted to that would attach them to this character. I gave him a connection to his family, being ripped from his family, and really having that drive that all he really wanted to do was get back to his family. And how can he do that? He'd have to play nice for the majority of the journey to try to get back to them. And so a lot of twists and turns happen along the way. But I really kept that family element in there as the base, even with him connecting with Lord Nobunaga. The family element played off very well, and a lot of the themes of a fish out of water, the odd couple, those kind of things played into that narrative very well. And the book just came out. I'm really like head over heels about how well it came together.
That's very cool. Very cool. I know that there's a lot of research that goes into historical writing, but it sounds like there was a lot of joy in that research for you too.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was like just so enamored with the character of Yasuki, and there was this challenge of me to continually keep the story in the forefront because I think sometimes as you're a writer, you know what you're writing, what you're writing, but I wanted to keep kind of making it very organic in the way it flowed. So those questions that I had, I was like, I'm sure the readers are asking this question too. I'm sure they want to know about this too. So I wanted to try to answer those, not in exposition, but more just as the story told itself, where I would have all my facts over here, like, oh, this would be a great time to talk about the trade industry here. So, there will be these opportunities where Lord Nobunaga would be at the table with his master of coin and his military advisors and his political advisors, and they would have these conversations, and it would play out so naturally as things that they just did in their day to day, and coming up with, knowing that Yasuki was not from Japan, the challenge of him trying to understand the language and the culture, I kept that in the forefront. That in and of itself was part of the conflict that he went, other than just the one antagonist who kind of reared his head very early. It's the other, just a challenge of like man versus situation, man versus nature. It was all of those things. So Yusuke was kind of being bent and twisted and pulled in so many directions throughout the story that I think people can just feel that and they would root for him on so many levels. He ended up becoming a character that had a lot of, he was really dynamic. He had a lot attached to him, more so than a lot of the characters I've written, because they weren't in a totally different element. They were just trying to get through the one they were in. And so the only one who I think comes to mind is Kisa in Broken. She had a lot. She was dealing with just being a young juvenile in this world of dystopian, time after uh, all the bombs dropped and she separated from her family. Now she's also a surrogate parent to her younger brother. Then there's these love interests, and there's all this teenage stuff. So she had a lot going on, but definitely Yusuke, man. Every time he turned around, it was a new challenge. And so I used other characters in the story to kind of help propel him through it, where I came up with like a mentor with Oscar Mayo, the blind kind of, he was a mentor to Oda Nobunaga when he was young, and now here he is inheriting this foreigner and doing the same kind of things as well, teaching him the ways, teaching him how to fight and all that stuff. So all of that just kind of blended really well. And I'm just excited. We just had a book signing yesterday at Barnes and Noble, and people ate the book up after I told them the storyline. So I know it's one of these stories that has legs. It's just a matter of continuing to just get the word out and having people pick it up.
Yeah, yeah. Without any spoilers or anything like that, was there anything that was most surprising as you were exploring this time period and this person?
A few things kind of jumped out at me as I pulled the information, is that, most the most obvious, honestly, was that his name was Yusuke. That's a Japanese name, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
he walked in with that name. Somebody had to give him that name. So obviously, who gave him that name? I basically came up with that narrative. Oh, I know who gave it to him, but I wanted to show how he came about. And then what was his name before? So we came up with another name that was very authentic to Sudanese culture. And so it gave me opportunity to kind of break it down, go from the ending of all the information, and then slowly kind of turn back and start adding these elements to it. I think a lot of times when I write, my characters start to kind of give me information that I don't or recognize, but as I'm going through my outline, the way they come up against things, if you created a character that is fully realized, when they get in situations, you'll have a natural response to how they deal with that situation. So that kind of tells you a little bit of something about them. So I really went deep into writing his characterization before. Did he have an attitude? Was he a strong person? Was he soft? Was he hard on people? How would he react when you put him in certain circumstances? Was he a thinker? And so the beginning of the book really outlines a lot of Lord Obunogi before we even get to Yasuki, because I felt like with them kind of coming together towards the last, like maybe 40% of the book, there was a great opportunity to play off of one another based on Lord Nobunaga's character and his personality. I didn't want to have to drop that in later. I wanted people to get that, understand him, and we basically fall right in when he's a youngster, because he does, he is kind of taking over the reins of his father, who was the Lord before him. So let's give you a little snapshot of how he was, what got him on his journey. Then we drop you back with Yasuki, and then when they come together, they're both older now, these men, and they have different things. The drive for Yasuki was get back to my family, while Lord Nobunaga was all about unification. He wanted to
Mm-hmm.
unify. Japan under one banner. And so he had a lot of wars that he fought in against just other rival factions who were trying to oppose him, even though he was working for the greater good. He was an amazing tactician. He was one of the first Japanese lords to actually welcome in guns because a lot of fighting was done with swords and knives and things like that. And so I wanted to make the connection between him and Yasuke feel real. So a lot of the um, interactions were very distant at first, even to the fact that Lord Nobunaga spoke obviously Japanese and Yasuke did not. So there was a translator to kind of give him the information when it was when it was not insulting. And then so as they built, and then these big epic moments came where they finally did, or maybe even forced to connect, and then Yasuke finally gets to the level where he is as a samurai. It feels natural and it feels earned, and that was a big part of my story. I didn't want to make it just magically, oh, I'm a samurai. Here you go. I wanted it to be like this climb, and the hero's journey was really, really rugged in this book. And then so even with Literary Titan, they gave it 5 stars, and it won like a gold medal for a book award for them, and it became one of the book of the month featured for February. The reviewer said, you know, Yasuki's ascension felt earned by the time they got there, and that's what. So I know that I was successful. Like, okay, I tried to play that card and it worked, you know.
Nice, nice, yeah. I'm curious about where you're heading next as a writer and publisher, where you're expanding, anything that you'd like to provide for listeners about that before we tell them where they can find the books.
Sure. So, you know, Yasuki, like we said, it's a duology. So it starts off as a historical fiction novel. And then the end of Yasuki is somewhat of a cliffhanger, really open-ended, because that's really what happened with his life. We really don't know what happened to him after the big events that happened with him and Lord Nobunaga. So it gave me a chance to kind of pay homage to the things that I loved about Asian culture, which is a lot of it was manga and a lot of the fights and things like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I grew up on looking at Samurai Sunday on Sundays at 7 o'clock with all the fighting with the Japanese movies, and they were fantastic. So I said, let me just do a graphic novel that takes us on another journey with Yasuki, where we can kind of almost play in this kind of fictional world called Elsewhere, where some of the rules of physics don't apply, so that we can have him do these same similar things as the old Japanese movie. So the novel Dead Man Walking is the novel, while the graphic novel is Resurrection. And so it kind of takes you on a nice fantasy thing. So you get to see Yasuki really do a lot of this great fighting beyond some of the battles that he fought in the historical fiction. And I had even had in the historical fiction novel, I hinted at a world beyond the compound where Nobunaga had his people, where Yasuki was out in the forest, where there's this dark forest that like nobody goes to, and they hinted at this evil deity that lives there named Chiwa. And so I just kind of dropped that nugget on him, and then I actually came out with a side comic book. It's called the Blood Moons, the Yasuki story, a Yasuki story, which basically follows the origin story of Chiwa. So now we actually learn how that deity was created, because that ended up being the deity that he ended up fighting in the graphic novel. So even though it's a duology, you still have this great side story that kind of really gets you into the mythology of what I created with Yasuki. And I would say the way the graphic novel ends, we still got a lot more life in Yasuki. So I think people can anticipate seeing more of him coming next year. I think what people can anticipate this year from Cosby Productions as a small press publisher is that we are going to finally release the third book in the Archangel X trilogy from the late William Hayashi. We'll also see more of ANBK, African Ninja Vampire Killers. I'm co-writing that issues 2 and 3 with Kaio Champion, who was the creator of the first one. Got a lot of praise on that from a comic book standpoint. We're also going to be releasing more from author Keyshawn Dodge. We just dropped his Menzuo book 5, Friend or Foe, which ended up doing amazingly well on Amazon. And we should be hearing some more from favorite authors like Lawrence St. John and Daniel Payton and Drew Samuelson, whose book series Restart is now in the school system where he lives.
Very cool. Very cool. If I'm a listener and I want to check out the work, where might I go?
Best thing to do is just head on over to www.cosbymediaproductions with an S.com. They can pick, they'll be able to scroll down the center of the website. It's very easy to navigate. We have it basically listed out by genre. So just click on that image and it'll take you to the books in the genre. If you don't want to buy some of the books directly from us, we do have a storefront for all of our hybrid stories where you have the novels and comics. We got them all listed out on there. You can buy them directly from us. We'll ship them out to you. If you don't want to do that, every book has a link that will take you to where it's listed for Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And we also have our social media on our website as well. They can click the link to take them to Instagram. If you're looking for Cosby Media Productions, it's Cosby Media Productions on Instagram. And it's Star Child Comics, Star Child underscore comic, and Braxton A. Cosby. But you can, like I said, if you go to the website, you can get the links there. Easiest way to navigate.
Fantastic, fantastic. Braxton, always glad to talk with you. Always glad to hear about the work that's on the way, and many thanks for the creating that you're doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Like I said, thanks for having me on again. And I hope your listeners go out there and grab some stuff. And if I tell you, if you're a reader and you just love new original stories, man, we've got some talented authors. Go ahead and show them some love and pick up something from the site.